Thanks for joining me for episode 6 of the Social Permaculture Online Bootcamp. I'm Ben Habib and I'm your guide for this journey. So in this episode, we're casting our gaze outward and upward to examine permaculture ethics from the perspective of power and systems of power. Permaculture practice needs nourishing economic, social and cultural ground in which to take root. So this is a point that I've made several times in our previous videos. But in that regard, much of our society today is a desert. It's not fertile ground for the nourishing practice, for that permaculture way of life that we really want to go for. So why is it a desert? Well, to answer that question and to do something about it, more importantly, we need to incorporate an understanding of power into our social permaculture pattern literacy. So in this video, we'll ground our exploration of power in the 3 core permaculture ethics. So that's earth care, people care, and fair share. We'll then define systems of power as the key foundation of our social systems pattern literacy. And to cap it off, we'll finish with an activity. And in this activity, we'll develop a basic systemic map of power relationships across different scales. So drawing on that political Holland's model that we've used previously. And we'll reflect on our ethical responsibilities to that knowledge. I invite you into this space of vulnerability to do this difficult work. This does require critical self-reflection, but I don't do this as some kind of saint or out of any self-righteousness, but I invite you into this vulnerable space as the deeply imperfect human being that I am, someone who's fucked up many times, just like everyone else. No one is perfect, and everyone is compromised one way or another by systemic power. If we truly aspire to live the permaculture ethics, this is the discomfort that we need to sit with. So let's start off with the ethics. Permaculture practice is grounded in a system of ethics, and that's based on those 3 interconnected ethics of earth care, people care, and fair share. And these offer a really clear vision about the type of society that we want to live in, the type of society that permaculture practice is geared towards facilitating. Almost every permaculture book contains thoughtful discussion of the permaculture ethics, so I won't go into mega detail here. Suffice it to say that there's lots of information out there if you want to explore the ethics in detail. The important observation I want to make here is that putting the ethics into practice is really difficult. So why? Why are they so hard to actualize in practice? And the answer to that is intuitively obvious. It's hard to integrate these ethics simultaneously in societies that have ingrained inequalities and in societies that have discriminatory power hierarchies. So even when we try to embody these ethics as individuals, we find ourselves embedded in larger systems of power that are ecologically destructive, that are harmful to people, and that are deeply unequal. COVID-19 has shown us how embedded we are in transnational networks and how interconnected we are with other people, and how our lives are shaped by many different systems of power. The coronavirus has also magnified the existing biases within the systems of power that shape our lives. So it's been, like climate change, it's been a threat multiplier. It's exacerbated the pre-existing problems and inequalities that already exist. The pandemic has disproportionately impacted people who are already vulnerable, and it's shifted the burden of keeping society function onto those people who were already the most exploited. Amidst that chaos and uncertainty, a lot of people have been looking for simple answers to make sense of that turmoil. And we see that in the proliferation of wild conspiracy theories and the scapegoating of minority groups, which is what I see as an attempt to critique the discriminatory social relations that we're embedded in, but without a sophisticated pattern understanding of how systems of power actually work. If we zoom out from COVID-19 and look at the larger context of ecological crisis, we see these same patterns at play. Different individuals and groups relate differently to climate change due to their complex, cross-cutting relationships to different structures of power. The people who are already vulnerable and disadvantaged are disproportionately more at risk from climate change impacts. And also, these are the people that are least responsible for greenhouse gas pollution. So there's a clear justice problem at work in how climate change is impacting on human societies. And again, we see wild conspiracy theories flying around that betray a naivety about patterns of power, a naivety about complex social relations, and the place of ecology in human systems. So that's something we need to address. There's a kernel of truth in these conspiracy theories, but we need to be able to flesh out that truth in a more sophisticated way. Like it or not, our society at the present time is scarred by sets of cross-cutting social and economic cleavages, by intersecting sets of discriminatory power hierarchies that are at play in all human interactions. So one of the objectives of social permaculture is to give us some tools to see these systems of power and to interact with systems of power in constructive ways, in ways that affirm the three permaculture ethics. So this is a guide for right behaviour, and we need tools to do this. So we want to create the socioeconomic compost to grow communities of solidarity. So we can't go from zero to solidarity in one step. We can't go from atomised individualism to solidarity in one go. We need to lay this socioeconomic compost, and that's really what Social Permaculture Online Bootcamp is about, so that we can become custodians of a vibrant forest of earth care, people care, and fair share. Power is one of the central preoccupations of political thought since ancient times. And it's an emergent outcome, it's an emergent consequence of human interactions, and it's an inescapable feature of human relationships. But yet, while power relationships are inevitable, there's nothing at all natural about the shape that they take. That's a function of both long-term economic, political, and social processes, as well as the active decisions of people, and more importantly, of institutions, about how power should be distributed. Power relationships can and do change. So from a social permaculture perspective, our goal is to facilitate changes to power relations that reflect our three core ethics. Now, there's libraries full of scholarly rumination on the subject of power, from traditions from across the world that go back thousands of years. So there's no need for us to go into that here. Instead, though, I want to draw from a perspective that comes from within the permaculture movement that'll help us develop a functional pattern language of power, something that we can use. I'd like to start with Starhawk, who's an elder of the permaculture movement, a well-published author and an activist legend. I'll put links to Starhawk's website in the show notes, and she's pictured here. The functional definitions of power that she's outlined in her book, Truth or Dare, Encounters with Power, Authority and Mystery, I think these are as good a functional pattern language of power as you'll find anywhere. In Truth or Dare, Starhawk identifies three categories of how power is managed and projected. So these are power over, power with, and power from within. So let's flesh these out in a bit more detail here. We'll start with Starhawk's definition of power over first, because power over, of the three models that Starhawk proposes, is the most pervasive. Power over is hierarchical, it's coercive, it's about domination and compelling compliance and obedience through coercion, manipulation, and influence. Power over is about separation and the creation of a binary between the ruler and the ruled, or us against them. This is the model of power that practices across the institutions of our society tend to embody. So yes, it's the political system, but it's not just the political system. We experience power over daily in our workplaces. We experience it in our educational institutions. We experience it in our interactions with government agencies and corporations and so on. Power over is encoded into our built landscapes. It's encoded into our buildings and our fences and our walls. The danger of the COVID-19 moment is that power over is getting a chance to embed itself even further through authoritarian creep. But when we talk about systems of power, we're talking about something beyond one person exercising power over another person. We're talking about a structure, something that's an organization or an institution, something that's pervasive across a society. We're talking about a system that has resources and the ability to project power at scale. So something that's systemically organized and projects at scale. So keep that in mind, particularly when we approach the activity later on. Yet power doesn't have to be distributed hierarchically and unequally. The second type of power that Starhawk identifies is something called power with. And this is social power. It's collaborative and horizontal. And it's the ability to get things done collectively as a group. Power with is the power that underpins best practice resilience and adaptation, for example. So the purpose of social permaculture is to promote and to foster and to facilitate this type of power in permaculture practice and within our communities. So power with is about bringing balance to relationships between people, as well as balance between groups, and bring balance to the human role as a constituent species within the broader natural environment. Finally, Starhawk's third category of power is called power from within. Power from within is about self-mastery and self-actualization, and it's rooted in self-knowledge. From that self-knowledge, we develop an appreciation for how interconnected we are with everyone and everything around us. As above, so below. So if we want to practice power with effectively, first we need to master power from within. So this is our responsibility as individuals if we want to play a constructive role within groups and in collaborative efforts. So we need to do that power within work. The work we did in episode 2, for example, with the Face COVID framework, is an example of how we might draw on power from within to move beyond fear and to move toward collective well-being. From a permaculture perspective, we just can't accept coercive power that hurts people. It contravenes our core ethic of people care. Our people care practice needs to be able to foster human relationships and communities that are nurturing and empowering, rather than disempowering and traumatizing. In our activity in this video, we're going to map what power over looks like at different levels of scale across different power hierarchies that exist in our society. So this is about opening our eyes to the patterns of hierarchy that shape our human interactions. Power over shapes up differently for different people, depending on who you are and where you are. So for some people, and particularly for people from marginalized groups, their lived experience of power over is immediate and it's raw. For others, it's something that's more opaque because they're not on the receiving end of that big stick. So through opening our eyes and through developing this pattern language, we want to be able to put these power relationships out in the open so that we can do something about it, so we can care for the people that are at the wrong end of the hierarchy. And for the people who have more privilege across these systems is to be able to draw on that privilege in order to help each other out and to be able to flatten those hierarchies. So again, we're using the political Hollands model to help us see power over as systems and not just the moral failing of individuals. So that's really one of the good things about using this nested Hollands model is you get to see a systems view of the things you're describing, how they operate and actualize and manifest at different scales. And that's really important when we're looking at systems of power. Okay, so here's the skinny. Using this grid, describe how power over manifests in each power hierarchy, which is the vertical columns, at each different level of scale, the horizontal rows. Please do take your time. Power over manifests in different ways at different scales. So what we want to develop here is this system understanding of power over. It's also important not to make general assumptions about the powers that be. So that level of generalization isn't a pattern language, and that's the kind of generalization that you see in some of these conspiracy theories. If the powers that be is your description of power, then you're not really describing anything. Now, as you go, add your observations to your Social Permaculture Online Bootcamp diary. This is, again, the information, the learning that we're making through the activities that we're doing here is cumulative, and it's adding to the compost. It's laying the foundation for the collaborative work that we want to do as permaculture practitioners in order to develop the sustainable society. Now, also, just a note on the grid, of course, there's other power hierarchies that we could mention here. So feel free to add these to your grid as you feel is appropriate. Remember, these activities need to be appropriate for you and your circumstances. So please do adapt and amend them as you see fit. All right, once we've completed the grid, it's time for some reflection. Power with is about escaping the power over binaries. So it's about reshaping hierarchical power dynamics so that we can put permaculture ethics into practice. Power from within is about doing the self-work necessary to step up to power with. But as I'm sure you're probably finding, doing this kind of work is likely to dredge up lots of different emotions. And I'd encourage you to sit with those emotions, to pay homage to them. Don't try and push them out of the way. Don't try and judge them. Just like we did with Face COVID in video 2, sit with the emotions. The discomfort that you feel when you confront power over, this is another pattern language that's a rich source of information about how you interact with the world around you. So pay attention to these feelings. Both physical and emotional, because they're trying to tell you something. It is a truism that we're all inevitably nested within systems of power. Most of us will have been on both the coercive and receiving ends of some of these power relationships. In either of these situations, what self-work do we need to do to arrive at a place of ethical practice? Wherever we are relatively in those power hierarchies, what's the self-work that we need to do to arrive at a place of ethical practice? This is a really key question. And importantly, what collaborative work do we need to do to get there? So remember, challenging entrenched power hierarchies requires collective action. Individuals just simply don't have the leverage over systems of power to enforce change. The balance of leverage just isn't there. So collective action is really key. This work is also about engaging our capacity for empathy and noticing what's right in front of us. So what did you notice about how these different power hierarchies intersect with each other? How does power over cut across and reinforce? What are some of your blind spots when it comes to power over? Was there stuff that you noticed doing this activity that you hadn't thought was important before or that you'd overlooked? It's important to get honest and acknowledge what our blind spots are. To work on your blind spots in recognizing patterns of power over, I recommend checking out and working through some of the suggested resources in the show notes. And of course, people have been doing this work across lots of different social movements for centuries. So we're not reinventing the wheel. And we're drawing on and we're building on the body of knowledge and the practices for justice and ethical living that people have been building on for a long, long period of time. So we're standing on the shoulders of giants, and when we do the work, we'll be one of those giants that future generations are standing on top of us. So that's the goal.